Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and today I'm joined by my other amazing host.
Hi, it's me, May, also known as Magic.
Well, hey, welcome back, Magic. I know you were, we kind of missed you on the last one. Stu and I were talking about that. We were ranking host, and you automatically had default of number one, so Stu just immediately slotted himself into the number two position, and, you know, there's only three of us, so I know where I lie. But it was pretty funny. We missed you last week. We had a good time.
Give y'all some credit. You're very important backbones to the podcast. I mean, after all, it was your show first.
May actually came up with an idea. We were kind of going back and forth as we do. I had an episode written, and she's like, well, what if we talk about pet cards? And this is the thing that I was kind of holding back from May, because I wanted to share this with her now. I was thinking to myself, you know, I think I've moved past pet cards. I feel like my cube curation, this is the inner Anthony, right? I'm monologuing here. I feel like my curation style now is I just don't get hung up on cards anymore. I can just go through cards now and cut them with impunity and not even think about it. That's going to be such a hard episode for me to write. I immediately went into, forgive me, May, but I went into my own little diatribe in my brain of dismissal. I don't even think I can write this. I don't think I have any emotional attachment. Later that evening, I'm sitting down to update my cubes. And while I'm doing this, there's a couple of cards hey, I really need to cut this card. This card is pretty good. And then I'm sorting through and I'm like, but I just can't. I can't cut this card. It's so dreamy. It's so perfect for my environment. I just can't let this one go. I know this card in this other hand is better.
So damn, I was you're really just out here lying to yourself in your head, full chest and all, huh?
That's exactly what was happening.
I'm above such things.
I'm above that. I have
pet cards.
Immediately fell in. I'm like, damn it, May. I thought I was I'd hit that level of enlightenment. No, I still am oh my gosh, I have so many pet cards.
And guess what?
Do it.
That's okay. Pet cards can be a good thing.
So we kind of named this episode, whenever I call these names out, they may change with time, but I like what I did here. So we're going to get into this in a minute, but we're going to have pet cards, health bars, and happy meters. I just kind of wanted to make this a little bit more expansive than our traditional, because as I'm sorting through my cards and this epiphany, this wash is coming over me that, like May said, I've been lying to myself, trying to convince myself I'm above and beyond the idea of pet cards. I started really thinking about this more than I should, as I do. But before we go down this rabbit hole of a conversation, we got a few little announcements I want to throw here in the front. So Capital Cube Championships 2024, held by a good friend Lincoln, will be hosted on Saturday, August the 17th. It will be a 64-player competition during which 8 cubes will be hosted, and it's going to go to support the charity so others might eat. So our good friend Lincoln is doing the thing and looking out for the community, and I just commend him for that. So I will have the details for this cube event that will be hosted outside the DC area, and you guys can look forward to signing that up. Tickets are on sale now. The next one we have is Cube for a Cause, which our good friend Scott Mertz that came on to talk about the Curio Cube is hosting. And on Saturday, August the 24th, 2024, from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m., Cube for the Cause will be a twice-a-year type event, 64 players. And this one will be an interesting one because it's another charity event, and it'll be hosted in Brooklyn, New York. And the profits for this one will be donated to UNRWA. It's an aid organization supporting Palestinian refugees. So another just hats off to both Lincoln and to Scott for really just showing that Cube can be more than just playing Magic sometimes, right? So you're getting an applause from me. I'm just giving it to you. I can't not do this. So I'm proud of you both. So those details will be included in our show notes. So before we go any further down this conversation about pet cards, health bars, and happy meters, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we are going to enjoy our libations of the show, starting with the wonderful May. What are you having on this delightful Thursday afternoon, which is a weird day for us?
It's definitely a weird day for it, but that's okay. I'm actually keeping it simple and having just mango punch quirk. It's just a simple seltzer.
Sounds delicious. And I'm actually going to have myself a Two-Hearted IPA by Bell's Brewing. I'm pretty excited about this one, so one of my favorites. Going to crack it open. Let's get to the show. So, May, would you mind covering, as I said, I named this based off of your idea and the one that I refused to actually believe in at the time, and apologies, and, we always getting better, right? Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about pet cards, health bars, and happy meters, and what we mean by that, please?
Sure. So generally when we're designing our cubes, we tend to start with a sort of top-down idea of, I want to play an environment where I can play these types of cards. So the most immediate example is things like Sarah Angel, Shivan Dragon, and the Fake Cube, right? Where we can look at this and then say, this is just a kind of power level metric that I'm trying to build around. And then as you're doing it and as you're building it, there are cards that may either just be put in because of flavor, because of power, because of miscellaneous reasons that you just can't bring yourself to cut because they've just become your pets. However, you need to also dial it back a little and understand what's the health meter of that card, and more importantly, what is the happiness that it brings.
Yeah, so I would include that. So I tried to do my little rudimentary definitions. I was scratching them together, and I was curious. I think May and I land pretty closely on this idea. So when we look at these cards we're going to talk about soon, I kind of put this pet card as a card that provides an emotional response, a memory, or a reflection of a positive experience. A card that we love and is difficult to be convinced to let go of. And I'm going to go ahead and add, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. The next one, I'm going to say a health bar, and I'm being a little loose with that, but I'm basically saying like the wellness of your cube environment. Is this card providing a positive experience in terms of the cube's overall health? Game enrichment or necessary components. Is it a detriment to my environment? Question mark, right? Like when I add this card, how tilting is this card? Is it a positive tilt or a negative tilt? And then the next one, I'm putting happy meter, and this really lands into the find the fun aspect, right? This takes into account the joy of a card, but it's really placing it on the interaction, not just for yourself as the caster, but also as the opponent that's experiencing the card, right? And I know there's a lot of subjectivity tethered to the idea of fun. However, just from a generic stance, does the game provide a joyful or an enriching experience? And then I added to that, as we do, what do I put? Context matters? Does context always matter?
Oh, yeah.
Does it
context always matters.
Yeah, so when we look at these, we're going to be looking at pet, health, and happy, which will be equal to fun. And it's a pretty simplistic manner of viewing these cards. And I kind of, May, if you don't mind, if you could bear with me here, I'm going to crack into one that I think is a complicated conversation out the gate. You cool with that?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so we're going to get some context. So the context always matters. So this is going to be Uberbear's powered 540 cube. And we're going to talk about a couple of these cards in here. And so the context of it will be in a vintage environment, because that does matter where the feelings land and the health and the fun factor and all these things that kind of add to the idea of vintage. And the card that I wanted to talk about, and this was the one that made me raise my eyebrow the other day, May. This is the secret card that I was holding back on. When May told me, she said, "You have a pet card. Let's talk about it." And I was thinking to myself, I don't believe in pet cards anymore. Like I said, I've risen above that. I'll cut anything without any thought, total malice, just do it. And then I found out, like, I can't do it. I wanted to try so bad. The card, and this is going to get the groans out of everybody, was opposition. For 2 colorless and 2 blue, you get an enchantment. Tap an untapped creature you control. Tap target artifact, creature, or land. And I recently, to give a little bit more context, I recently got a foil of this. I think it was from the Brothers War, if I'm not mistaken, where they reprinted this. And I finally got a foil that I could afford. So that's the context. So out of those 3, May, without me adding any more subject matter to that, is that a pet card? Is it a fun card? And is it a healthy card in context of a vintage cube environment? And your thoughts?
So, opposition has a weird place in my heart in particular. Because when it comes to a lot of those protection blue enchant cards, for lack of a better term for this umbrella, right? They serve an important function, is that when they are down, they can create a very, very important flood wall to keep your opponent at bay while you're trying to establish control. And what's neat about opposition is that in the context of vintage is that it's basically a hard playstyle shift into control for limited, and that can be fun for the control player. But this is where we start going into the questions of, does it increase the happiness? Does it play well with the rest of your environment? And that comes down to what your players have said, what your experiences have been with it, and etc. And I think that what makes it potentially a pet card is, regardless of those factors, you still would like to keep it in.
Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and let's start out with this from the gate. Opposition is a miserable card. Like, this is something that I'll say. I'll just say it's a miserable card to be sitting across the other side of the table and having opposition being done to you. It is hard to convince the opponent to say that that experience was fun, because once opposition comes online, it can be very much a game over situation. Contextually, the reason why I wanted to talk about opposition is this is in a powered vintage cube. So there's a couple of things. This is not a card evaluation episode, but this one kind of creates this unique situation where in a vintage cube, and I've said this before, I can almost, and I know there's some rare exceptions, but almost put in any old card into a powered vintage environment that's pressing the highest level. Think MTGO. And it could be egregious and borderline goes unnoticed. And again, it's 1 out of 540. So there's a lot of contextualization that can go in that idea. But it's hard for me to say that this card is fun. Like, I would struggle with ever saying opposition is a fun Magic card. I would also never, me personally speaking to my environments, ever put opposition outside of that vintage environment. Although I did once do it, May, in a commander deck, and I decided immediately that needed to go because, again, it took away from the fun, casual nature of playing commander. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I had an Arcalos deck that did the same thing.
Yeah, so this is frankly a misery-inducing card. But this is the one environment where I can host this card. Now, where we're at currently in the, we're in the 2024 era of Magic as we do, and I just added some additional free spells such as, the flares, the flare of denial is what I added. So the free spelling that we talked about have become more prevalent. And then we've got the subtleties and all these things in blue, and things are becoming, the casting costs are driving down. So cards like opposition in my particular environment are definitely becoming less appealing a lot of times to drafters because the cost, how rapid, how frequently, how sped up this environment has become just from the releases and the additions that I've made to the cube, the changes. Mm-hmm. But it was so neat to me when you said build an entire episode about pet cards, and I found myself doing a swap out. I was adding in Simulacrum Synthesizer I think this was just last night actually, and I was trying to find a cut for it, and I had opposition in my left hand and I had the synthesizer in my right hand, and I put the opposition down and put it back in the box, and I found something else to cut for it. I could not bring myself to it. That emotional connection of a couple of things. One, I really love the art. Two, it took me forever to actually get a foil that I liked, that I could afford in this particular, with Urza on it, that I couldn't get before. So that's part of that emotional attachment, if you will, right? Like, I'm thinking to myself, I just invested in this card. I just added it. I chased forever to get this foil. I really wanted it in this environment. I really don't want to cut it, although the acknowledgement is there that it's not fun. Not really. It's fun for the caster, not for the opponent. Let's just all be real with each other. Anybody that sat across from opposition can acknowledge that. And then secondly, as I said, the power creep of my environment where things have sped up has taken down anything that costs 4 is really kind of in that danger zone anyways. Would you agree with that statement, May? May?
I think in the context of the card of how it functions within the cube is not really... How do I put it? We can create a bunch of justifications of why opposition can belong in there or why it doesn't belong in there or whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's a card that you have a personal attachment to. And that's what makes it hard to let it go. Like, I don't remember who I was having a conversation with, but they were telling me about how they really like the Pox cards. And that's their pet cards, is that they just really love the Pox package. And
me too.
Point is that sometimes people have the opinion that it's as fun as a zero-sum game and I'm going to make sure I'm having all of it. Right? Was that the expression?
Yeah. I hope you brought extra fun because I'm taking that too. And so if I go through those 3 questions, I say pet card, I'm going to check yes. It's currently a pet card. It's a card that I think it brings me joy, although not others, which leads into the health bar. Is this card healthy for the environment? I would say in this vintage cube environment, it is, unfortunately, by the nature of what it does, it is in fact healthy because the health meter is wildly expanded. It's a broad stroking brush in a powered vintage environment, right? Health is very, very strange and contextualized in that type of environment. If I go to the happy meter, the fun factor of it, it's a very much a one-sided fun card. Once it sticks and once it comes online, if your opponent can't deal with it, and that's the case with everything, right? It will pretty much shut games down. So it fails. For me, it fails that test. But the first 2, it passes. Does that seem okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about when we're evaluating these types of cards from a curator's perspective, you have to ask yourself, is this adding to the personality of your environment as well?
Yeah, I would struggle. So we've kind of talked about this before, and I've slightly, and it's not through, it's Powered Vintage, what I have. I have it, I built it, and I've stated on numerous occasions, it's not my thumbprint, it's not my favorite cube. I do curate it, I do have fun with it, I do enjoy it, but it doesn't have like this, it doesn't really feel like me. So it's very strange to me that I found a pet card in that environment. I thought this could be the one that I could be most cold and most callous about making cuts for, opposed to some of my ones that I feel like are mine, right? Like I made the Artifact Cube, I made the Monopoly, I made the Fem. Those are harder. But when I get into the one that I feel like, and I don't want to use the word crowdsourcing, but it's very much like my Vintage Power Cube, we've talked about this before, is very much driven off of the opinions of others in my play group. Like, hey, this card's too weak, this is too strong, and I kind of just say, okay. But for whatever reason, I held out on this one, it's going to stay for a little while. And that's okay. That's the takeaway here. That's okay. It just, over time, just know that maybe you're putting a pin in it. But we're going to move on past opposition. This isn't the opposition episode, but I thought it was so neat because this is the one thing that, like, I was challenging May on in my mind, and then it literally, I found out I had this strange emotional connection to this card. I guess I have pet cards, May.
Congratulations. Welcome to the club.
I know.
We have cards.
Let's talk about, I've got two of them on here, two more in the Powered Vintage Cube, and these are uniquely pet cards. These are legitimately pet cards. Opposition is just a strong card, and a lot of people will see it in a list and just kind of glance over it and say, yeah, whatever, Opposition's in a Vintage Cube environment. But this one, Bolas' Citadel, for 3 colorless and triple black, you get a legendary artifact. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play the top card of your library. If you cast this spell this way, pay life equal to the converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost. Tap, sacrifice 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. This card, I have defended tooth and nail, even when I'll say, like, it's a Tinkerer target, May. Mm-hmm. I'll say, and the next card, I'll just go ahead and chain off to it because it's in the same list. I'll say it's a Goblin Welder target. And these two, I'm just going to go and pair them together, bring them together, because they're both on my list. Even when I was definitely taking the level of artifacts down a notch, I found myself holding on to Bolas the Citadel and Goblin Welder kind of hell or high water, if you will. No matter what. Like, nobody could convince me otherwise. Even if it didn't meet, like, at the time, the highest tier, the highest power. You understand where I'm flowing with that?
Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it just needs to scratch a certain, let's say, gameplay itch, right? Where we're trying to have some card that generates some kind of value engine or does this one card thing, and then you're trying to build your entire strategy around getting it out. And that can be fun. It can be a pet card in the sense that it fuels a Johnny player. The Johnny within yourself is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, so separating those three, opposition, I'll put over to the left and say it didn't pass all those litmus tests. But I'm going to go ahead and say Bolas' Citadel and Goblin Welder. I didn't read the card, but for people who aren't familiar, Goblin Welder for 1 red. You get a 1/1 Goblin Artificer. Tap it, choose an artifact a player controls, and target artifact in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal, as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. I love, like, you hit the nail on the head. Those are both, to me, like, the interesting dynamic of a vintage environment. You know, in the world of, I'm telling you, I've got all these free spells and stuff like that, which they have their own dynamics. These two feel like my little opportunity to put my thumbprint within that environment and have fun with it. So, May, if I asked you, putting those two in a clump, did they pass that test of pet card, health card, happy meter for you? As you being the opponent, how would you feel about sitting across from these three?
I mean, I'd feel pretty neutral about actually playing against them, but I think more importantly of that they add a lot of personality to your vintage cube. They add a sort of feeling that might not even keep up with... They create a sort of fingerprint for your own environment and the types of archetypes and feelings that you're trying to invoke within your environment, despite just being a vintage power cube.
And what's interesting, as time progression has went by, I told you I had kind of this slow decline where, like, I've cut the metalworkers and stuff like that just because of speed and game change and modern cards. But interestingly enough, I've got stuff that's entering there, like I said, Simulacrum Synthesizer, and then we've got other artifacts that are now finding their way into the environment that have importance, these cards suddenly kind of, because they were the holdouts and they held in for so long, now through time, they've now become relevant again to a certain degree. Like, it's a relevant tinkerer target, and I think that's so much fun. So yeah, you and I believe, agree on that. May, you had a couple of cards you wanted to talk about, correct?
I did. I actually wanted to talk about pet cards don't necessarily have to be power outliers or cards that kind of feel out of place because of their interaction within the environment, but rather it can be a sort of flavor profiling thing. So for example, in the Fey Cube, there is only one transform card in there, and it's Scorn Villager. And Scorn Villager, for context, is 1 and a green for a human werewolf, 1/1. Tap it, add 1 green mana. At the beginning of each of your upkeeps, if a spell was cast last turn, transform it into Moonsguard Werewolf, which is a 2/2 with Vigilance, tap it, add 2 green mana, and then at the beginning of each end step, if a player casts 2 or more spells, then transform it back. So, this card mechanically feels out of place in the Fey Cube. But it's a card I can never bring myself to cut because it adds a certain personality to it. The reason that I fell in love with the Fey Cube, like, as a concept is because I was able to look at Scorn Villager and feel like this feels like a self-contained Little Red Riding Hood type character, right? Like, we have Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf with a twist, and that's the kind of magical feeling that I wanted to portray within this cube. So even though it doesn't really fit any of the themes within my cube, it is a pet card in that respect because it fits a certain flavor profile. It's not a bad card, it's just kind of an out-of-place card that I can't bring myself to cut.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Scorn Villager is a great card. We talked about this one too, and I think this one works for you. We had a little bit of a pre-gaming conversation. We were talking about Wolfear Avenger, which is kind of a pet card for both of us too. I try to find, I love it too. I actually, at one point, I did run it in my Unga Bunga package in the Powered Cube, but then I have it in the Horror Cube as well too. And for me, that's just a card that brings me joy. And for those that don't know that one, I don't have it right at the top, so you can correct me, but I think that one was at 2 green and 1 white, or 1 colorless. You have Flash, and then you can bring it in, and it has Regenerate, something along those lines. Don't have the card directly in front of me, but that's the gist. And I just think that's such a neat card that it was interesting to talk to you about that we found commonality in a card. Every chance I get, I want to put that card. I'm actually thinking about maybe putting that one in the Munson Lords of Metal because Wolfear Avenger is pretty metal. Would you agree?
Yeah, I like it a lot. I feel like that it's one of those cards that I try to slap into any cube that I can just because of what it does is being really simple. And you're right, it is 1 colorless green for a Wolf Warrior creature that's a 3/3 with Flash. And you can pay 1 and a green to regenerate it.
Yeah, it's such a fun card. So that's like a super pet card for me. And it was so interesting to find another curator who goes, that's a pet card for me too. So let's move over to the Artifact Cube. And we're kind of going to keep doing this litmus test of whether or not this is a pet card, whether or not this is a healthy card, or whether or not this is a fun card, happy meter, right? Or is it all three, right? This first one is going to probably really test your sensibilities on that one, May. And I want your thoughts on it. And then I'll kind of give my defense to the hearth, right? But Thada Adel, Acquisitor, for 1 colorless and 2 blue, you get a 2/2 legendary creature Merfolk Rogue. Island Walk. Whenever Thada Adel deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for an artifact card and exile it. Then that player shuffles their library. Until the end of turn, you may play that card.
Oh, I hate it.
What do you Yeah. I want your honest truth on that one. So what's the definition of... I'm not going to pretend
that it's like a spectacular or broken card in your environment, but oh my... Yeah. I can see why it would be a pet card for you.
Yeah. I realize this kind of...
I would have the same feeling of if somebody briberied me, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. 100%. I had to let bribery go not too long ago. I understand because I realize the misery that card induces. So in context of an artifact cube, you can see where this card's very dangerous. And the fact that I even experimented with it from the inception, I don't know if that was the best choice. But I will say, as time has progressed in that environment, and as I've tuned that environment, history may prove me wrong, but to date, this card hasn't... I've asked people, because this is an important question, did you have fun? Did you enjoy your games? Do you have any feedback for me, right? I want not just your strategic statements, but I also want your fun level, your happy meter. Did you feel like this is a detriment? And when players have played this, I haven't seen any blowouts. And I'm not saying you can't put equipment on it, you can't give it evasion. I try to limit that. Those things can happen. It always has its form of island walk, right?
Mhm.
So, strangely enough, despite how this card reads, it hasn't busted the cube to date. And the cube's been around for a long time. And I've always watched it. I've always wondered if this was a bad decision. It is a pet card, so the health aspect of the cube was being watched. And I just haven't seen anybody, make or break this card, if that's fair, to date.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
And sometimes just holding out hopes that one day it's going to happen, and it's going to feel like a big thing. And I feel like that's a reasonable reason to keep a card. Like, for example, the Fake Cube actually has a card that has a similar shtick. Not in terms of, like, mechanically, but in terms of my relationship with the card, and that's Countryside Crusher, right? Where it's 1 red, Giant Warrior, 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into your graveyard, and then repeat this process. Whenever a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Countryside Crusher. So, it became a sort of meme card within the Fake Cube that I'm still holding out hope that people are going to try to slam the 39 Mountains Countryside Crusher deck just because it's hilarious. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm holding out hope for it. Because there's a good amount of people that are actually genuinely excited for that type of, I guess, meme, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, so I think that one, Countryside Crusher, checks all the boxes. That's fun. I don't feel like it's in any way unhealthy for your environment. Matter of fact, it may be a detriment to the player, not the environment, right, to do the thing. And I think the payoff is the juice is worth the squeeze. So I think it's a fun card. And you've talked about this before. You called it, what, Red Dump Red or Red Dump Land? Or what would...
Yeah, there was a period where I was trying to support the archetype specifically around it, but then after a while, I just started changing how Land Dump Red worked into like this sort of combo package, and then, Countryside Crusher still stood amongst the rest as the individual card that doesn't need no help.
So, switching gears back to Uberbear's Artifact Cube, I've had a card that's been in there from as long as I can remember, the Great Hinge for 7 colorless and 2 green, yet legendary artifact. The spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Tap it, add 2 green to your pool, and you gain 2 life. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. So, fun factor, I'm going to go with 100%. Like, this is turning it to 11. I've had questions presented to me from players, and it's all about, like, I guess the temperament of the player and what they want to get out of the environment. So I'll cite ChillMTG because I watched him draft it online, and he was using this card to great effect. And it didn't seem broken, and it didn't seem, the next part I'm going to say is win more, because this card is easy to identify for that large cost as win more-ish. It can be very much a win more card. But it was almost like it brought the player joy. It's a pet card of mine. That's why it's in here, acknowledging that 9 mana is a huge hurdle to get through, even though it has a reduction in cost, kind of like our good friend Galta. But it's so fascinating to me that other players, and I'll cite our good friend Lincoln in his write-up when he went to the UberCubeathon, was kind of talking about he was going to put the card in his subset, but then removed it because he felt like it just didn't add anything to, I guess, what he was trying to accomplish with his deck building. So I look at this card as a weird build-around, achievement unlocked, less of a win more, like someone accomplished this and they're proud of themselves, and I see fun in it. Do you see fun in this card?
Yeah, I think that it has potential to unlock a lot of fun and interesting deck building in a way that Thada doesn't really. That might be a stretch to say, but...
No, I 100% agree. Yeah, Thada would very much like to get this card out of your deck and attempt to cast it. But yeah, I see your point. Like, Thada is a bribery on a stick, and she really challenges that. I could see the fun analysis of Thada coming into question in the right situation, right? Somebody could say that was the most miserable game of Magic I ever played.
It brings us back to the appeasing our own inner Johnnies as curators, because it's just like, this is a thing that I would like to build, and that's why I'm including it. Package, if that's all right if I talk about it.
Of course.
That fills a similar niche, if you will. So, in the context of my travel cube, there's actually a couple cards that fill a similar Inner Johnny type feeling, and some of you might be familiar with this combo, where it is Vesuvian Shapeshifter and Brine Elemental. So, Brine Elemental, it has Morph. When it's turned face up, each opponent skips their next untap step. And Vesuvian Shapeshifter, when it flips, it can become a copy of something, and then you can flip it back face down. So when you have them both, you can essentially lock people out of the game. And it's essentially a 2-card win con that can sometimes live the dream and come together. And in the context of generally creature-heavy, beat-em-up style of like this bar cube, having this kind of 2-card combo in here to live the dream, it might be out of place in terms of power level, but it also kind of feeds that live the dream-esque feeling that we're looking for of, yeah, but if I'm building that deck, I want to be like in that deck.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask the 3 questions, and I think you qualified the idea of pet cards there, right? You
Right.
enjoy these 2 cards. The next one is if you take these 2 and break them apart, put them in a vacuum, I would say they're okay, they're healthy for the environment. But I'm going to bring into question the fun factor of it. Is it fun for the person who's assembling it because of the aha that is assembled and they do the thing? If they figure this out and they abuse it, does it translate to fun across the table? Do they shake hands? Do they do their little salutes to each other? You know what I'm saying? And call that a good game? Or do you have the potential of another person getting locked out by a 2-card combo and then not experiencing the fun overall? I can see that challenge too. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it definitely can be a challenge. And my counterpoint is that I also haven't had a lot of feedback because it hasn't come together yet. So I'm hoping that when I bring this for the bar cubes on CubeCon, then, we'll eventually get that feedback.
Yeah, so I agree with that 100%. And I think you just got to push it through and test it. I think it's like, maybe it's an obscure combo and people might not notice that. So I think there's a degree of fun. The contextualization of fun is always a matter of subjectivity, but
it's also
here
a lot
we
of mana.
are. Yeah, it's 1 billion mana. So I feel like maybe you could argue they earned it too, right? I mean, that's part of that.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, so this next one I think is one that I had no expectation of being good. This fell into 100% pet category, and our good friend Samich and I, we've talked about this card. This is one of our all-time favorite Magic cards, and not because it was ever like heralded as being a great card, right? As a matter of fact, we almost thought it had seen its time, and then I'm going to give a little story time to say that in this environment, it's kind of probably shouldn't be overlooked, but it's Triskelion for 6 colorless, artifact creature construct. Triskelion enters the battlefield with 3 1/1 counters on it. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Triskelion. It deals 1 damage to any target for a 1/1. And I had to put the construct art in here as a little side note. The modern art opposed to the dumb-looking robot that I love so much that you'll find on Uber.
I love
Uber
the
Bears
dumb-looking robot.
The dumb robot doesn't call itself a construct because I do have construct synergies in here, and I just felt like people would miss that. Mostly, I probably missed that for 5 years, to be honest with you. But I saw more people get dead at CubeCon and other events from realizing, hey, I can do some serious nonsense with Triskelion.
I love
not
Triskelion.
Talking about
it's walking ballista, but with more nonsense.
It's more nonsense. And it's also, I'm not talking about like the combos with Triskelion. I'm not talking about the 2-card combos. I'm straight up just talking about modular and proliferation, making Triskelion great again kind of thing. It's amazing how this card has just surfaced as people snag this card and don't laugh at it when they see that environment. And to me, this was always just a pet that I put in there that I felt was a little dirtily, a little goofy. I just wanted it to be something like my little personal thumbprint in my environment. And then to see players play this to absolute great effect is just blown my mind. So, yeah, I think it kind of qualifies for all 3. I'm going to say it's definitely a pet card because it's always been. I'm going to say it's healthy for the environment. And I'm going to say that people have never gotten aggravated on both sides of the table or in a multiplayer environment. They understand Triskelion's effect. It doesn't throw anybody off, so it's healthy for the environment. What do you agree with those statements?
Yeah, and what's cool is that it leans into a lot of your strategies and it can lead to interesting deck building. And sometimes when it comes to cards like these is that pet cards can be the outlier.
Didn't expect it. Sam Black was the first person that really showed me that in CubeCon #1 when I watched the videos back. It was pretty amazing. This next one, though, I'm going to lean in and say that this is 100% a pet card. And I've been staring at it for a while and acknowledging, going back to the acknowledgement, that there are definitely better Magic cards that could serve this function, is Steel Hellkite for 6 colorless, artifact creature dragon, you get a 5/5. Flying, pay 2 colorless, Steel Hellkite gets +1 until the end of the turn for every 2 you pay. And then X, which can kill tokens, destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost, mana value, cost X, whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. This is my Shivan Dragon, is what my thumbprint was here. This is why I can't let this card go.
I mean,
what do you think about this one, May?
So, look, well, I'm a simple creature. I see big dumb dragon. I see big dumb artifact. I am a happy creature.
Yeah, that's how I felt about it too. Like I can see an argument that if this, because Fairy Baneslayer, if we're categorizing that, has to make contact with the player, this could decimate an entire token strategy in that environment. But I'm going to lean in and say that's okay because my token strategies can go a little wild in this environment too. So if you're paying 6 mana, you connect, and you do the X is 0 for the destroy, and you blow up all the Thopters because it just happens to get through for whatever reason, or just say Servos, doesn't matter. I feel like that probably needed to happen. I will say that this card is probably not in scaling with the rest of the environment. It's definitely not a pack 1 pick 1. It might be a pack 1, I don't know, a pack 14 pick 70. I don't know at this point. I feel like players just kind of pass around the table. It definitely qualifies for pet level for me and really follows, like I told you before, that Shivan Dragon aspect, but like in a artifact type environment. So that's kind of my summary of that card. May, do you have any additional cards you wish to add?
There's actually a pet card that's been on my mind for a bit, and in case you haven't heard, there was essentially this type of minigame draft type variant called the Big Spender Cube that I have, and one of the pet cards that I have in there is called Form of the Dragon. And in the context of this environment, you're essentially buying the card up front, and then you never pay its mana cost ever again. So if you ever wanted to bounce it back to your hand from the graveyard, or back onto the board, or just hold on to it to the very last moment, or you could just drop it in the beginning of the game. It's a type of card that can centralize the draft, but it hasn't really been an issue within the context of my environment, but it has that sort of fear factor that comes along with it in a way that I actually kind of like. And it became a sort of pet card because of that sort of fear factor behind it, of we know it's lurking. The Form of the Dragon is in there. So how are we going to prepare for it?
And I think Form of the Dragon's amazing. We kind of talked about that when you were building the Big Spender. And even though it was your pet, if you recall, Stu and I kind of went, ooh, like we wanted to do that too, right? Like if it happened
it's fun.
To me,
it's scary. It's the thing you want to do.
Yeah. And I kind of want to see someone else do too. Like if I were the opponent sitting across the table and you did Form of the Dragon and you pulled that off and you were successful at that strategy, I, as your opponent, would not have any negative feelings about that. It'd be like, oh, that is super cool. You totally pulled that off. And I guess that's what I'm asking when I'm saying the fun factor is not just is it fun for you, but is it also fun for thee, right?
Right.
So when we're looking at these in context, I feel like Form of the Dragon is so many hoops to jump through, and you pulled that off, that is cool as hell. That's my opinion on that matter. So, yeah, I can see that, and I think it checks all the boxes for me personally. This next one I have is referencing Uberbear's Horror Cube, and I'm going to talk about the card Living Death. For 3 colorless and 2 black, you get a sorcery. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all the creature they control, then put all card they exiled this way onto the battlefield. I had to do all the erratas there. But what's interesting about this card is, for the longest time, I ran this in my Powered Vintage Cube. And people could argue that this could still work, right? This is a fun card. Like, this has always just been like, that is cool because it's symmetrical, all these ETBs firing off, the prioritization of the ETBs. It can get really complex, right? People definitely don't necessarily love the trigger counts whenever this goes around the table and who's holding priority and who gets to do what and all that stuff. But it's such a fascinating card. Read simply, plays complex. And this is such a pet card for me that I had to find somewhere for this to go. And this art is just absolutely stellar. What do you think about that card in the Horror Cube?
Yeah, I think that it's a case where it represents visually what your cube is trying to do in a way that is important for cards to do. Like, it was a lot like Scorn Villager for me, where obviously this is an entirely different power level in terms of like card quality compared to Scorn Villager, but in terms of what role it fills as our like pet card and what kind of feeling that it invokes, I think that it has a similar niche where you're trying to give a certain vibe of, yes, the undead has risen, all hell is breaking loose type of card. And
That's exactly.
It is
Absolutely.
the go-to for that. So
I've got 2 more cards in here, and for the sake of time, they'll be included in the show notes, but Master of the Wild Hunt is another pet card of mine. I love this card. It's moved around different cubes. It's such a fun card. But this next one, I actually want to talk about a little bit in the terms of health. Falcon Wrath Aristocrat. For 2 colorless and Rakdos, you get a creature vampire, flying haste. Sacrifice a creature. Falcon Wrath Aristocrat is indestructible this turn. If the sacrificed creature is a human, or was a human, pardon me, because it died, put a 1/1 counter on Falcon Wrath Aristocrat for a 4/1. Now, I've seen this card, wreck boards, but it requires setup. It requires, a certain amount of, I guess, evasion outside of just the flying. The 4/1 can get out of control, but having the humans, all these choices. I haven't seen this card become like a unhealthy card, but the fact that it gets indestructible always made me kind of glare at it a little bit longer than I should. What do you think about the healthiness of this card in terms of that? You're familiar with that environment, what I'm trying to do.
So, I really like this card. But it's also one of those cards where it can get such mixed responses, but I think that that's also why it's perfect for the environment. So, sometimes getting the mixed response is a good response.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at it too. Like it's a little bit like cringe for me too. I realize that it could basically decimate your opponent sitting across table, and they might not even get a chance to really. But it does cost 4 mana. There's a lot of arguments that could be made, but I would say that it's kind of a needed like payoff for that sacrifice synergies too, to a degree, and it's kind of the flagship for that aristocrat package too. But the fact that it has flying and haste, is pretty brutal. It's
the indestructible, and the fact that it scales with flying is definitely one of the things that makes it one of the scarier cards within that environment, and that's what makes it so divisive for me, is just the fact of, yes, this thing hits the table, and you do not have a very specific way to deal with it, then you're kind of going to get run over, and that's what makes it divisive.
Yeah, so I can see every side of that. So I would say the health meter on that one's probably pretty middling, right? It just depends on the situation and the environment.
But it's the aristocrat. Come on.
It is the, so this is where it gets super weird, right? Like, it's strange, but it's such a cool card, and I wanted to give it a home. So giving it a home is kind of my point. Mm-hmm. Let's ask yourself, what if you built an entire cube? And I know, May, you're all about this. What if you built an entire cube that fostered and just allowed all of your pet cards to coexist, opposed to like, this is my pet card, one of 150, one of 540, etc. But what if instead you really built an entire environment just chock full of cards that bring you joy? How do you think that might turn out? And I'm going to answer it because we've talked about this before. It's the Munson Lords of Metal, and we've talked about this in a previous episode, and I do recommend listening to the episode where our good friend Stephen Conefall sings a little bit of Metallica for you. But it's an entire environment that's based around cards that kind of represent slash metal, death metal. You'll get the idea of it pretty quick when you check it out. It'll be included in the show notes. But it's just chock full of cards that I think are more fun, more balanced, and just don't get a chance to come into the sun very often any longer, that I wanted to give them a chance. And I'll just go ahead and short time one of these for you. It'll be Master of the Feast. And that card Oh my gosh, it is so much fun. It'll be in the show notes, but it's just such a little chunky little enchantment creature demon
See,
that I
you say
always wanted to
little.
find a home for. Yeah, he's chunky.
It's a
He's
5/5
chunky,
flyer.
but you got to give your opponent
He's
an
a
extra card.
chunky boy.
He's chunky.
Oh Lord,
boy.
he coming. He is beyond fun sized. He's the whole family package.
He's on his way to the Sizzler. But this next card, I love this card more than I should. This is going to be one of my ultimate pet cards, and I had to put it somewhere. And it's Royal Assassin. Like, this is my pets among pets. For 1 colorless and 2 black, you get a 1/1. Human Assassin. Tap, destroy target tapped creature. This takes me back to the way Magic, when I first started playing. That's ultimately the experience I got. If I had to, literally say, is this healthy for the environment? Absolutely. Is this fun? I think most people would argue that this card is fun as hell. Is it clunky? Absolutely.
I mean,
is it a pet card?
And I don't regret it.
It's so... Yeah, it's so much fun. Like, this card's...
Let me play my Timmy cards.
That I just wanted to find a home for as we kind of close this off. And there's a whole bunch of them. I encourage you to check out the Munson Lords of Metal Cube, where I just filled it full of cards that are... And you know what? It's interesting, the dynamic of putting a bunch of pet cards inside of a cube. It is amongst our friend group one of their favorite cubes, because not only am I creating the atmosphere by playing Metallica or Sepultura, but in addition to that, these cards aren't great, but they feel amazing in this Jund-based environment. It's funny because the reason why I mentioned this last night, again, going back to that epiphany that I thought that I had become well above the idea of pet cards when you presented this to me. I was updating the Munson Cube too, and I had to make cuts from this cube. And you want to talk about, I hadn't even gotten to this one yet. Oh my God, I have an emotional attachment more than I should to a large amount of these cards in this environment. The cuts were a nightmare. And if you actually look at my blog, May, you'll realize I haven't cut a card or changed a card in the Munson Cube in forever because I can't bring myself to do it. And as I'm sitting there thinking, May, I'm well above this pet card idea.
Oh, look at me. I'm Anthony. I don't have any pet cards. You with your quiet stash of cards you quietly refuse to remove. No, I don't know what you're talking about, May. Don't acknowledge these. Look away.
Pet cards don't exist, yet builds a pet cube. So... this has been a really fun episode. May, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't have a lot of major final thoughts. Just, it's okay to have pet cards, and it's okay to have cards that make you as the curator happy. After all, that's half of the fun for cube curation, is creating your own project and a home for places that, for cards that you want to play.
I would agree with that. I'd say ask yourself, is it fun? And when I say fun, I'm not referring just for fun for you, but I'm also saying fun for May sitting across the table as your opponent, because that's a 2-part fun, I think, a little bit. So when you're looking at your cards and you're evaluating your pet cards, it's just a good way to lean into them a little bit, in my opinion. And a lot of pet cards, as we kind of talked about, they represent your fingerprint, your uniqueness of being a curator, right? They may not be the most optimal. Hell, they might even be suboptimal. And people might see that. But I think the large majority of cube curators and or players, when you say, I just love this card more than I should, I just love this card, some of them might scoff, some of them might grin. We got some good friends that do that, but the majority of them will always understand, right? This card's very important to me for reasons that I simply can't explain sometimes.
I mean,
and
you still slash Jim Dragon whenever you can. Yeah,
and I think to close that off, and this is to kind of quote our good friend Derek Gallen, who put a post up on Twitter recently, and I wrote him back a nice little letter or whatever, because he's inspired me a lot and helped improve my thoughts on the game. And one of the things that he said was, ask the players overall, was this a fun experience? That should be the number one thing that we ask as cube curators, not was this optimal, was this the best plays, but rather start with, was this fun for you? Did you have a great time? And I think that's a vibe, right? That's where kind of the vibe lies of the idea of cube. So other than that, I hope this has been a fun episode. We just had a good time. Wanted to do something lighthearted. May and I wanted to get together and talk about some cards that brought us joy. We'd love to get your feedback and take a look at the list. It'll be uploaded in the show notes. And let us know if you have any pet cards. Hit us up on our Discords, our Twitters, etc. And let us know, this card, I have such an attachment for it. This is why I love this card so much. But let's go ahead and do a shout out for our Patreons, and we truly appreciate all of our Patreons. The growth of the Patreon has been pretty great lately, and I'm so happy that listeners are coming out to support the show, and I hope that we're making a show that you truly enjoy, and let us know if you have any feedback or ideas or concerns. We are open to it 100%. We're always trying to do better. That's what we're here for. You know, we've talked about this amongst ourselves as a team. We want to always get a little better. So also, you can find us, particularly me and Stu, and I'd love to get May on there. She don't do the Facebook, but MTG Facebook drafting page is getting really big now. We're encroaching 900 different members, and we foster a really comfortable environment where people can come in and exchange ideas, pack one, pick ones. I want to build my first cube. I want to listen to some podcasts, stuff like that. And it's just like an open forum, and I love it so much. So you can find that at facebook.com/groups/MTGCube. Also, you can support the show because UberCube is an UltraSleeves affiliate. You can find us at ultrasleeves.com/UberCube, where you can get 5% off of your purchases. I love UltraSleeves. And if you want to support the show, please use our Inked Gaming affiliate link, where you can get your playmats, your dice bags, etc. I've actually ordered quite a bit from there, so we got our UberCube mats from. It's a really great site. I love it so much. And you can find us at Twitter, or at X, whichever one you want to call it, at UberCubeMTGPod.
So
May, how do they reach you on the socials?
Get dragged back to Twitter.
Oh, did it?
It
Okay,
did.
so May, how do they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Magic1 if you ever wanted to just contact me directly. So there you go.
And we would love to see you in our Discord. You can find us, we have a link for the show, an invite on there for Discord. And we always have to brag about Stu's 2 brainchilds. He has 2 of them. One is his Deck Boast channel, which people love to get in there and talk about what they built, what they played with, how they lost. It's so much fun. And then the other one he built like a full page for cube projects, so people can start discussing their ideas, etc. So if you want to join our Discord, it'll be in the show notes. You can find the link in Major Players. And then lastly, you can find us on patreon.com/UberCube. This has been a really fun episode, May. I wanted to talk about our pets and how pets are just okay. They are wonderful. And other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is
Happy
cubing. Spay and neuter your pets.